Hello students, the theme of our lecture is translation and the intercultural communication.
The plan of the lecture consists of the effects of translation in the past and nowadays, the different aspects of languages while translation, and interaction of language and translation. The importance of the translation in the development of the culture, science, economics, literature, and the language itself is described in the works of the native and foreign scientists. The problem of speech decoding for communication appeared when a process of dividing people into groups using different languages started in a civilization history. As different nations enter into trade, military, political, economical, cultural, and scientific relations over the course of history, the translation is one of the oldest types of the sensible human activity. Since the ancient times, the translation serves the functions of interlingual and intercultural communication of people both among the countries on a territory of multilingual states. Interlingual tribes and nations lived in ancient Carthage, Egypt, Greece, the Roman Empire, Central Asia, India, and Iran. The more international the state was, the more important the translators were. For example, in Carthage, the case of translators were people of great worship and distinction. They had an emblem, bright decorated parrot. Colorful flags of Paris showed the languages the translators worked with. Appearance of the written language played a great role in the translation development. First, it gave an impetus to the intercultural exchange, the achievements in different human activity spheres. Second, the new type of translation, namely the written translation, started being used. The written translation goes pari passu with the oral translation. Besides the oral statements, the translators started translating the written texts. Nowadays, we could see the translation boom in a science and technique. More than 70% of the translators work in that sphere. The great part of the translations is the business correspondence, consumer information texts, manuals, prospectus, and etc., scientific and technical documents, different contracts, specification, and etc. Being the mean of communication of people of different nationalities, the translation is the mean of interlingual and intercultural communication. Schweitzer gives the following definition. Translation can be described as one-way and two-phase process of the interlingual and intercultural communication. The translator creates a secondary text on the basis of the translation analysis of the primary text. The secondary text replaces the primary text in the other verbal and cultural environment. This process is aimed to transfer the communicative effect of the primary text and is often motivated by the difference between two languages, two cultures, and two communicative situations. One of the main principles when analyzing the translation is understanding that communication is interaction of the individuals, where communicants are the representatives of the culture and certain linguistic and cultural community. The translation as the mean of the mediation is the mean of the both interlingual and intercultural communication. Analyzing the translation as the intercultural communication is connected with understanding the language as the component of the culture, national, social, and cultural formation. Culture is a complex of the spiritual and material values of the society, including all the many-sidedness of the historical, social, and psychological peculiarities of the ethnos, its traditions, views, institutes, behavior, way of life, living conditions, for example, all the sides of living and consciousness including language. This understanding of the language is perceived as the national, social, and cultural formation, reflecting the peculiarities of the ethnos as the certain culture being that points it out and distinguishes it among other cultures. In translation process, not only two and more languages interact, but two cultures having both common and national specification does. Extraction of the common, international, human, particular, special, and national things is an important principle when studying the intercultural communication. Derivation of the common things of the mankind and national and specific things are identified when studying such notions as conceptual and linguistic view of the world. The human origin is characterized by the similar way of thinking of people speaking different languages. It is explained by the physical nature of a man, functions of the brain, and higher nervous system. Unity of the world and the objectivity of the world, all the people live and unite the people. National languages of the numerous nations existing in the world are different ways of the spiritual understanding of the reality. This understanding of the reality basis on a similar principles of the human thinking leads to the adequate understanding of the real world. The logics of the man thinking reflecting the external world objectively is united for all people, no matter what language they speak. External conditions, material life influence the consciousness of people, their behavior, and form the worldview. The worldview reflected in the man consciousness is the secondary existence of the objective world fixed and realized in the original material form. The language and the linguistic view of the world are that material form. During the formation of the linguistic view of the world, the language is just a form of the expressing conceptual matter that a man obtains during the activity process, theory, and practice. In general, the language correlates with the objective world, and the difference is in a national and conceptual and linguistic view of the world of the ethnos, which are connected with the different ways of the world development. No matter how peculiar the separate linguistic models are, finally all of them are the reflective of the world and a man consciousness. At the same time, the certain external conditions of the separate ethnos existing, geographic and psychological and anthropological peculiarities and cultural traditions, form the specific qualities of the images determining the notional conceptual view of the world and the national linguistic view of the world. Nowadays, nobody doubts that languages reflect the reality in a different way, asymmetrically. When during the translation the languages come into contact describing any piece of the reality of the language by means of the using the other language, asymmetry is clearly expressed. We see that languages divide the reality, describe the same events and subjects in different way, paying attention to their different features. So the semantics of the word reflects the worldview of the native speaker of the certain language. There are certain indications in the base of calling. These features can vary in different languages. For example, the word glasses for eyes. In the Russian language, this word очки derivates from the word очи, eyes. The base of the English word glasses is the material they are made of, glass. The French word lunette comes from the word moon that indicates the round moon. One more example, the word rainbow. In Russian, it's colorful boy. In English, rainbow. In both languages, there is no indication about. However, the connotation of the word ball is different. In Russian, it is colorful. In English, it is rain. So we face the problem that the part of the worldview which demonstrates the external similarity, for example, seems to be symmetric, is not equivalent. In fact, this non-equivalence shows the opposition of the general and particular things in the cognitive activity of a man of all levels of abstractions. Each ethnos has its own view of the world, common cultural events in four spheres, which are material, spiritual, behavior, and organized form. It is important that the elements of one culture may not have their analogy in the other culture as well, as understanding of the common cultural things can be different. These objects can evoke the different associations. They are connected with the cultural experience of people differently. For example, for people living in the south, snow is occasional a natural phenomenon. Sometimes it scares and irritates as it can stop the city life for some time. At the same time, the snow is a symbol for Christmas. For people living in a central part, the snow is usually a thing they expect, psychological readiness. They do not suffer from it. For people living in the far north, the snow is a usual thing. People of different cultures express joy and despair, love and hate in different ways. They see different colors, perceive the world and time differently. Someone has things which others do not have, or use the things which went out of fashion long ago. The way of thinking of the representatives of different societies is the same. However, it differs in emotional reflection, values, and etc. In a lingual view of the world, there is a list of the words, word combinations, and statements of the emotional reflection of the reality which have connotation, emotional and stylistic stress, motivation of which is characterized by the national and cultural context. For example, бить по клуши, twiddle one's thumbs. The conveyance of the emotional and stylistic aspect of the meaning in a translation is as important as the conveyance of the subject and logical meaning. The words sun and moon have positive characteristics and indications and a connotation meaning for different nations. For the North nations, the sun is perceived as the source of living, revival, and joy. It is seen in the address to a person, my son. For the South nations, a similar connotation is seen in the word moon rather than in the word sun. Being the objective system from the one hand and the result of the emotional and spiritual creative work of the nation from the other hand, the languages fix the peculiarities of the worldview. During the historical development, and fundamentally important images are fixed in the language and transferred by the next generation in a verbalized form. The external material conditions of the existence can change, however, the peculiarities of the national mentality are continued to be reproduced in the generations. The language proposed its speakers, the ready from the valuing and perception, and starts performing the function which was performed by the external environment at the beginning of the ethno-existence, designing the speaking and non-speaking behavior of people as the subject of the culture of this society. Peculiarity of the national lingual views of the world in great number of cultures is not an obstacle for the mutual understanding of the nations and is overcome in translations. One of the most important proofs of the compatibility of the logical and language systems are the fact of the mutual understandings of people on the basis of the translation from one language into the other. However, intercultural communication is adequate and successful only in the communicants being the representatives of different cultures and languages realize the echo of them is different and perceive that fact. Studying the culture of other nations is one of the most important social functions of the translation. The bilingual translator is like a double linguistic person. He perceives foreign text activity from the position of the linguistic culture of the foreign society. Then he translates social and cultural codes into the native language. The peculiarity of the bilingual translation is asymmetric character. For most translators, their native language and culture are dominative. This language and culture gain an influence over the others the translators face to. Through the prism of the dominative language and culture, we understand the meaning, perceive the effects of the other culture and the other language. During the translation, both languages function and speech simultaneously. Translators have to overcome the interference of the languages and the cultures. Under the linguistic integration, we understand the influence of two and more contacting languages. It can be both positive and negative, and it's shown in departure from the usual norm in one language under the influence of the other one, negative interference, acquiring, fixing, and intensification of the language skills under the influence of the other language, positive interference. More simple definition of the linguistic interference is interference of the elements of one language system into the other, one that can be both constructive and destructive. There are some types of the interference: phonetic, grammatical, morphological, syntactical, punctual, spelling, lexical, semantic, and stylistic. Thank you for your attention.